Yes.
Awesome. Okay, so we just started the call. I'll let you know the moment we have that first person join the line. Right now, they're just getting that welcome message. And Taylor, you're good to go.
Good evening and welcome to tonight's telephone town hall with Doug Owens, candidate for Utah's 4th Congressional District. My name is Taylor, and I'll be the moderator for tonight's event. We'll begin in just a moment. We're really excited to have you join us. Before we begin, a few quick points to make. Right now, we're in the process of dialing out still, so please just stay on the line and we'll be hearing from Doug Owens shortly. Also, we really want to hear from you tonight. If you'd like to ask a question of Doug, please press 0 on your telephone keypad, and you'll be connected directly with one of our volunteer operators. Again, remember to press 0 during the call at any time to ask a question. If you've just joined us, good evening and welcome to tonight's telephone town hall with Doug Owens, candidate for Utah's 4th Congressional District. I'm Taylor, and I'll be the moderator for tonight's event. We're going to begin in just a moment. Thank you for joining us. Right now, we're in the process of dialing out to thousands of people, so please stay on the line, and we'll hear from Doug Owens shortly. If you want to ask a question of Doug, please press 0 at any time during tonight's call. Again, to ask a question, please press 0 at any time, and you'll be connected with one of our volunteer operators. And now, without further delay, here is your candidate for Utah's 4th Congressional District, Doug Owens.
Hey, good evening, everybody. I appreciate you being here tonight. It's good of you to pay attention to the race, and I'm glad to be able to speak with you. I'm excited to be in the race. I want to just introduce myself very briefly, and then we'll get right to your questions. I am a 6th-generation Utahn, Salt Lake born and raised. I love Utah. I love the geography, the people, the history, and I want to help shape the future for all of us in a way that will help hardworking middle-class families in Utah and elsewhere, improve our quality of life, and work on common sense bipartisan solutions toward those ends. And I've got some ideas about how to end the dysfunction in Washington. I'll share those with you, but I'll wait for your questions on that issue and look forward to visiting with you tonight.
Thanks, Doug. Again, my name is Taylor, and I'll be the moderator for tonight's call. Before we start with the very first question, I want to remind you that at any point during the call, if you want to ask a question of Doug, go ahead and press 0 on your keypad, and you'll then be connected with a volunteer operator to ask your question. In the meantime, though, we'd really like to get your input and find out what issue is most important to you. So right now, we'll begin with a quick poll for those on the call. I'm going to read a list of issues 1 through 5. You can then indicate on your telephone keypad by pressing the corresponding number which issue matters most to you. If the most important issue to you is economy and jobs, press 1. If fiscal responsibility is the most important issue, press 2. Press 3 if reforming immigration is your top issue. Press 4 if investing in education is the issue that matters most to you. Press 5 if promoting bipartisanship is the most important issue. Again, right now we're taking a poll of those on the call. We're asking what issue matters most to you. Go ahead and press 1 through 5 corresponding with the issue. 1, economy and jobs. 2, fiscal responsibility. 3, reforming immigration. 4, investment in education. And 5, promoting bipartisanship. Go ahead and indicate which issue is most important to you by pressing the corresponding number, and we will discuss the poll results shortly. For now, we're going to go ahead and turn over the first question. Will go to Bob Greenwell from West Jordan. Bob has a question for Doug about his position on gun control. Bob, go ahead and ask your question.
Hello, Doug.
Hi.
Doug, I'm just curious. What is your position on gun control? It's an issue that is real controversial in the state of Utah. I'm just wondering what your your view is on this.
Oh, listen, I support the Second Amendment. I've got 8 guns myself. I grew up hunting and fishing and consider myself to be a friend and supporter of the Second Amendment.
Thanks, Doug, and thanks, Bob, for that question.
Bob.
I'm going to go ahead and discuss the poll results from our question about what issue matters most. The results are as follows. The top issue was economy and jobs. 25% of participants indicated that was their top issue. The second most common or most popular important issue was fiscal responsibility. Number 3 was reforming immigration. 4 was investing in education. And 5 was promoting bipartisanship. Again, the top poll results are economy and jobs, fiscal responsibility, reforming immigration, investment in education, and promoting bipartisanship. Thanks for all of those who participated in that poll. We're going to go ahead and go to the next question, which is from Bob in Salt Lake City. Bob has a question for Doug about for whom he would vote for House Speaker. Bob, go ahead with your question.
I just wanted to know if a vote were taken today and you were in Congress, to whom would you be casting your vote for Speaker of the House?
I have no idea, Bob. I have not. I don't know who's running, and I would seriously consider once I hear who's on the agenda. I'd love to hear what you think about it. I'd love to hear what the voters out there are thinking about these issues, but I don't have any opinion on that issue. I'll certainly do what's right for Utah. I don't have a partisan agenda in mind to push. Yeah.
Thanks, Bob. We're going to go ahead and move on to our next question, which is from Bruce in Kearns. He, again, has a question about the Second Amendment and Doug's position. Bruce, go ahead with your question when you're ready.
Okay, my question is, does the hopeful congressman feel that the Second Amendment is a collective right which can be changed by Congress, or is it an individual right like freedom of speech?
I think go ahead. Sorry, let me finish.
Go ahead,
finish. Your question.
Go ahead. You have the
well,
understanding.
Thanks, Bob. There's a lot of Bobs out there tonight. This is Bruce, I guess. But I think it's an individual right. I think that's certainly been the history of it. There's, I don't think it. I believe it's a constitutional right.
Thanks, Bruce. Again, a reminder to everyone on the call tonight, if you have a question for Doug, go ahead and press 0 on your keypad, and then you will be connected with a volunteer operator who will get you set to ask your question for Doug. Again, if you have a question for Doug at any time, go ahead and press 0, and you'll be connected to be able to ask that question. We can go ahead now and move on to another poll question. We'd like to know, actually, where you stand right now on the 4th District race. If you are planning to vote for Doug Owens or not, and if you're undecided. If you are planning to support Doug Owens in the race for Utah's 4th Congressional District, press 1 on your keypad. If you are not planning to vote for Doug, press 2. If you're still undecided and need more information, press 3. Again, right now we're asking a poll question of those on the call. We're asking if we can count on your vote on Election Day. If yes, you will be voting for Doug Owens, press 1. If no, press 2. If you're still undecided and need more information, press 3. And again, we will reveal those poll results here shortly. But now we'd like to go to another question. That question comes from Lola in West Valley City. Lola, go ahead with your question for Doug whenever you're ready.
I want to know how you feel about Speaker Boehner. Do you think he's doing a good job?
Well, Lola, thank you for the question. I think there's been some real problems in Congress, and it's a two-way street. I don't think it's a one-way street. We've had such excessive partisanship that we're not able to address the problems that we've got. I think it's absolutely a two-way street. I don't blame any one party. I think we've got to get back to a model where Congress is the deliberative body for our government, and we work across party lines to get things done. My father was Wayne Owens, a Democratic congressman who worked across the aisle with a Republican Senator, Jake Garn, for 5 years to fund the Central Utah Project Completion Act. That project brings water for 600,000 people to the Wasatch Front, and I think we've got to get back to the basics of finding out what's solvable and begin to move the ball down the road. I think we're in a world of hurt, and we need to work on it on a bipartisan basis.
The next question comes from Leanne in West Jordan, and she has another question about the Second Amendment. Leanne, go ahead with your question when you're ready. But I will remind, Leanne, I will remind the listeners that if you have a question for Doug, please press 0 on your keypad, and you'll be then directed to be able to ask that question. Again, press 0 at any time if you have a question for Doug. And now, Leanne, with your question.
Okay. Hi, Doug.
Hi.
I have a question about gun control. I realize that most of Utahns, or I guess the majority, feel that they have the right to bear arms, and I do too, but I'm concerned about the number of people that hold assault rifles and that kind of weaponry that seems a little extreme. Are you thinking of any regulation on those, or you just feel like it's open fair for anybody to have any kind of weapon?
Well, I do think it's hard to distinguish between an assault rifle and some other kind of rifle. I do support common sense, data-driven background checks. I think that's perfectly sensible to keep firearms out of the hands of convicts or other people who are potentially dangerous, like who have got family decrees against them or something like that. But other than that, I think we can trust people to have firearms in our country. I think we've agreed as a society on the Second Amendment, and I support it.
Thanks, Doug. Before we move on to our next question, again, I'll remind listeners that if you have a question for Doug, if you'd like to ask a question at any time, go ahead and press 0, and you will then be connected to be able to ask that question. Right now, we're going to go to Bob from West Jordan. Bob has a great question about Doug and Doug's father, former late Utah Congressman Wayne Owens. Bob, go ahead with your question when you're ready.
Hello, Doug. This is my second question tonight, but I remember your father was a great congressman for the state of Utah, and I remember that he walked the district for votes. Are you planning on following in your father's footsteps?
Well, I'm glad you asked that, Bob. He walked 700 miles in his first election. The district stretched from north to south for the entire length of the state. I'm certainly putting in a lot of shoe leather to meet a lot of voters and walking a lot of districts, knocking a lot of doors, but not walking the entire length of the state. Unfortunately, this district's a lot shorter than the one he had. But certainly agree the heart of the process is getting out and meeting voters.
Thanks for your question, Bob. We will now go to Mel from Taylorsville, who has a question for Doug. Before we get Mel's question, though, again, a reminder, if you have a question for Doug, please press 0, and then you'll be connected with a volunteer operator to ask your question. Now to Mel from Taylorsville, who has a question for Doug regarding immigration policy. Go ahead, Mel.
What is your position on undocumented people that we have in this country that are here, shall we say, illegally?
Well, I think that we need to have a process where people can come out of the shadows and pay a fine and get square with the law. I think we've got to secure the borders. I think we ought to have any illegal immigration process occurring, and I'm tired of that occurring. But I do favor a process where people who are here can pay a fine and get square with the law, and I think that's important for them to be able to come out of the shadows and participate more fully in the economy. I think that would be a big benefit to us all economically, and then if for some, I think that they can get in line behind people who came here legally and apply for citizenship, but I do not favor an amnesty program, a secure border, no amnesty, and a process for people to come out of the shadows.
Thanks for your question, Mel. Now we're going to go to Wade from Salt Lake City, who has questions regarding wilderness. Again, before we go to Wade, reminder to please press 0 at any time if you have a question for Doug. Press 0 and you'll be connected to ask that question. Now over to Wade in Salt Lake City. Wade, go ahead with your question whenever you're ready.
Okay. My question is regarding wilderness. Your dad, a Democrat, and you're a Democrat too, he was always at odds with our former House Representative Jim Hansen regarding wilderness. And I was just wondering if you're going to continue in your dad's footsteps and go along with the Utah Wilderness Alliance, trying to get as much wilderness as you can at the expense of trying to grow our economy through different ways of energy. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Wade. I think Utah is the most beautiful of the 50 states, but I think Utahns are good stewards of the land here. I want to see a stakeholder-driven process that balances extractive use. But I do recognize, we've got a big tourism industry in our state that's now 10% of the economy. That's based on our public lands. I think we need to capitalize on that going forward. So I do, but I favor a stakeholder-driven process, locally driven, with Utahns' voice paramount, and look forward to being part of that process. And I think that we can balance those extractive uses and the preservation for tourism and other values going forward.
Thanks so much for your question, Wade. Again, a reminder for all of those on the call right now that if you have a question for Doug Owens, please press 0 on your keypad, and you'll be connected to be able to ask your question. Before we move on to the next question, I'd like to reveal the results of our poll on whether or not those on the call will be voting for Doug Owens on Election Day. 29% of respondents indicated that yes, they're planning to vote for Doug Owens. And we have approximately 50% of respondents who said they're undecided and still need more information before they make their decision. And only 10% said no, they will not be voting for Doug. So there is a large group of voters that are still looking for more information and still getting to know Doug Owens, which is the reason why we're holding this call tonight. And perhaps a very appropriate question now comes from Ken in Salt Lake City. Ken's question for Doug is, why should I vote for you? Ken, go ahead and ask your question of Doug, and we'll look forward to his answer.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Owens, for taking my call. Unlike that large group of voters, I'm really not sure. Why should I vote for you?
Thank you, Ken. That's a great question. Listen, I mentioned I'm a sixth-generation Utahn. My wife and I wouldn't have raised our 4 kids anywhere else. I'm going to be a strong and independent voice for Utah and go to work for Utah families. I am not going to carry a partisan ideology to Washington. I think we were being killed by partisan ideology in Washington. I want to work across party lines to benefit the hardworking families in Utah. I believe strongly in education. This is a big difference I have with my opponent. I believe that's the path forward to build the economy, to help people help their families. When I was a kid, this was a country where one wage raised a family. And that's largely not true anymore. We've got to figure out, how do we get people into living wage jobs? To me, that path forward is education. I've got an opponent who wants to eliminate the Department of Education. That pays 10% of the funding of Utah public school system, and wants to do away with student loans and Pell Grants. And I strongly favor access to higher education as the means toward building our economy and helping people better able to take care of their families. So that's a very big issue for me, and I want to go to work on those economic issues that are impacting Utah families very hard in our time.
Thanks again for your question, Ken. Reminder to the listeners that if you have a question for Doug, please press 0 on your keypad and you'll be connected with a volunteer operator to ask your question. We are now going to go to Barbara from Midvale. Barbara has a question for Doug about essentially why she should vote for him. Barbara, do you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Yes. I wondered what is it about you and what you would do that would cause me to vote for you rather than for Mia Love?
Well, thank you, Barbara. I think one of the biggest differences between us is on Social Security and Medicare. I favor strongly the idea that seniors have earned those benefits. I think as Americans, we owe a debt of gratitude to seniors for making the country strong and keeping it free. And on maintaining and defending Social Security benefits for seniors is a very high priority for me. There's a big difference with my opponent on that. She wants to privatize Social Security and invest the benefits in Wall Street. In Wall Street. I don't think that's a good idea, given the recent past in particular. So I'll put Utah priorities first. I am going to be thinking about Utah. I'm going to be an independent voice for Utah, and I think that a stark contrast with my opponent. I think she's very interested in a national partisan ideology, and I've got Utah priorities that are most important to me. I'm going to consider that I work for the Utah voter and not anybody outside the state.
Thanks, Doug, and thanks, Barbara, for that question. Before we move on to our next question, again, a reminder, if you have a question for Doug, press 0 on your keypad and you'll be connected to ask that question. You can press 0 at any time during the call to ask a question of Doug. Now, moving on to the next question, we have a question from Dan in Salt Lake City, who has a question for Doug about protecting Utah's wild lands. Dan, go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, Doug.
Hi, Dan.
Hi, thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
I remember when your dad, Wayne Owens, did a lot to protect Utah's lands, and I wanted to know what you would do specifically to protect the lands of Utah.
Well, I mentioned a minute ago, Dan, I believe Utah is the most beautiful of the 50 states. I grew up herding cows in southern Utah. I'm going to have Utah's interests at heart when I go to Washington. I believe that Utahns are good stewards of the land. I believe that we can have a stakeholder-driven process to make decisions about what ought to be preserved for recreational usage. I take my kids out all the time to camp and fish, and I want to see those values maintained, our tourism economy built over time. I think that's very important. I want to get on the Natural Resource Committee and have a voice for Utah back on that committee. But I believe we can have a stakeholder-driven process that takes account of industrial use in our state as well as the tourism industry.
Thanks again for your question, Dan. We have several questions in the queue right now. Thanks for those who are on hold with a question. Thanks for being patient. We'll get to all your questions, or as many as we can. Again, if you have a question for Doug, remember to press 0, and we'll get you connected with a volunteer operator to ask that question. Now, moving on to Kathy from West Valley City. Kathy has a question regarding education and what Doug would do for education in Utah. Kathy, go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you. Doug, how do you feel about repealing No Child Left Behind and Race to the Top, turning the federal money into a block grant, and that would return control back to the states over education?
Thanks, Kathy. This is the most important issue facing us, I think, is how we approach education. On No Child Left Behind, I don't like one-size-fits-all solutions. I believe that Utahns were certainly able to educate our children. I would like to see the federal government have a supportive role that maintains the 10% of funding for Utah schools that comes from the federal government for Title I and special ed. I believe the federal government can incentivize STEM education in the state. I'd like to fix No Child Left Behind. It is a one-size-fits-all solution. I don't like to see schools that make a lot of progress, but nevertheless on their adequate yearly progress reports don't measure up to federal standards and get penalized for that. I think that's a big mistake. I think they need to be helped and rewarded for the progress that they do make. So I think No Child Left Behind definitely needs to be amended on a bipartisan basis. I'd like to see more bipartisanship. To me, this is common ground between the parties. We all ought to agree that education is investing in our future and is really the most important thing the government can do.
Thanks, Doug. Thanks again, Kathy, for your question. We'll now go to Bill. Bill has another question about education. Before Bill asks his question, again, a reminder to those on the call that if you have a question for Doug, press 0, and you'll be connected to ask that question. We'll now go to Bill with his question, another question about education. Bill, go ahead when you're ready.
Hi, I just wanted to follow up on the education issue. I hear a lot of people. It always seems like, oh, we're spending too much tax money on education, or oh, we're not spending enough. The state of Utah recently was given a D- grade in how they report the spending on education. They'll give you just the we spend X dollars per student. It's never broken down into where the money goes. And I don't think really that money is the problem. It's a global economy, and on the global front, we're in the bottom quartile in just about everything, but there's only 3 countries in the world that spend more money on education than we do. So I was just wondering what you think the actual fix is, or what the actual problem is.
Well, that's a wide-ranging question, Bill, and I appreciate it. I want to go to work on education. I think I mentioned fixing No Child Left Behind. I think that there's an important role for the federal government to incentivize STEM education, to work on early childhood education. I believe the science that shows that that really helps kids from less advantaged economic backgrounds. I think we need to have the most robust, best education system on the planet, because we have made the decision to enter the global economy and pit our people against people working for a lot less in China and Mexico and other countries. And I want to see them have every access to every opportunity to develop themselves. We have a great example in the history of our country in the GI Bill after the war, when people first had unprecedented access to higher ed, and we had an explosion in the economy. We can really enable people to contribute to the economy if we allow them better access to education. I think access to higher education, apprenticeship programs in high school for those not headed to college, where they can see a job at the end of the rainbow, and that's a reason to stay in school. So I think those are things that the government can help with, and is an absolute top priority to me, is to see that we build the most robust, best education system on the planet.
Thanks, Doug. Again, a reminder to those on the call that if you have a question for Doug, press 0 at any time, and you'll be able to ask the question of Doug. We'll now go to, forgive me if I mispronounce your name, but Hot from South Jordan, who has a question about student loans and what Doug would do to address the issue with higher education and student loans. Go ahead with your question when you're ready.
Yes, my name is Pat Paleska. I live in South Jordan. I am concerned about how you feel about the student loans that our young people are being burdened with, and how you would help them solve the problem of paying them off.
Thank you, Pat. That's a very important question. You're talking to somebody who borrowed his way through law school and bore that burden for quite a while, couldn't buy a house for a long time out of school. I want to maintain access to higher education and improve it, and that includes maintaining student loans. I'd like to see the student loan repayments indexed to what people earn, so that they can have the confidence that after 10 years of work that they'll be out of debt. There was a story about a week ago about people now starting to retire with their student loans still. That is a real burden on the economy. It's a real burden on families who need to get into homes and so forth. So I think student loans really help access to higher ed, and people need to be encouraged. I'll just throw one statistic out. If you're from an advantaged economic background and a kind of mediocre high school student, you're about 80% likely to go on and get a higher ed degree of some sort. If you're from a less advantaged economic background and a good student in high school, you're only 20% likely to go on and get a higher ed degree of some sort. And I mentioned this earlier. I think that access to education, that shows us that a lot of people are losing out on an opportunity for an education. Student loans really help people get that higher education. But we can work on costs of higher ed as well. So we need to bring costs down, but I'll leave it at that for now. Thank you, Pat.
Thanks, Pat, and thanks, Doug. Remember, if you have a question for Doug, you can press 0 at any time to ask your question of Doug. Going back to the first poll that we took at the beginning of the call, when we asked participants to rank their top issue, we asked about the following 5 issues: economy and jobs, fiscal responsibility, reforming immigration, investment in education, and promoting bipartisanship. And among those 5, far and away, the top issue was the economy and jobs. And so I would take this opportunity, based on that poll result, to go to Doug and ask Doug to spend a couple minutes talking about his plan to strengthen Utah's economy and help businesses create good jobs. Doug, do you want to spend a couple minutes talking about that, please?
Yeah, I think that's critical. Thank you, Taylor. I think I've mentioned already education is, to me, the common ground that ought to exist between the parties to build the economy that enables people to contribute their best efforts and talents through getting an education and being full-fledged participants in our free market that we've embraced in our country. I believe fully in that as the best single thing we can do in the long term to invest in our future. There was a study out recently by Standard & Poor's that said if every American in the workforce had had one more year of education on average, the economy would have grown by 0.5% more over the last 6 years. I mean, that's a tremendous thing. So besides education, I want to go to work on infrastructure. Utah's got 11% of its roads that are substandard. I'd like to see the Federal Highway Administration get on a more even planning keel and get attention paid to the aging infrastructure. That would create a lot of jobs in our country. I mentioned indexing student loans, investing in back on infrastructure for just a minute. Of course, we need to expand tracks in our valley through the south end of the valley. That's a big issue that would help with business development. I want to make sure that business regulation is reduced. I want to cut the corporate tax rate because companies are offshoring. We need to cut that by about 1/3 to be competitive with other developed countries. I want to incentivize companies to bring jobs back to the United States. Of course, we've lost 9 million manufacturing jobs in the last 20 years. We can keep energy prices low to help with that issue. We need to scrutinize new free trade agreements for their impacts on the workforce. I want to see retraining programs to help people who've been dislodged from the economy. I want to see a labeling law that would allow people an easier opportunity to buy American if that's what they choose to do. There's a lot of evidence that would help build jobs in our country.
Thanks, Doug. We have several questions lined up. Before we get to the next question, a reminder, if you have a question for Doug, press 0, and you'll be connected with an operator so you can ask Doug a question. We are now going to go to Jim from Taylorsville. Jim has a question about foreign policy. Go ahead when you're ready, Jim.
Yes, Doug, thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
I have a question on President Obama's activity in the Middle East, in particular with ISIS in Syria. Now, Congress is the only authority to be able to declare war, and do you feel that President Obama's activity now is kind of pushing us towards war? And if you were in Congress now, how would you address that?
Thank you, Jim. I think issues in the Middle East are a very top concern for me because I think that's I got 3 boys of draftable age, and I want to make sure that they don't go fight a war that is ill-conceived and we don't really want to do in the long run. I think that the Congress and the President need to get together and communicate on these issues. I think that the heart of the problem in the Middle East is the hostility between Israel and the Palestinians, and we need to help do everything we can to foster that peace process. Now, that's going to be up to them, but I think there's going to be an important avenue that's going to open up right away with humanitarian assistance to rebuild in Gaza, that Congress can put controls on that and make sure that humanitarian rebuilding, those resources are not diverted to militaristic use, which is what had happened over the last 6 years. And that can be an avenue toward getting a better government in Gaza, not a government run by terrorists, and that could help foster the peace process between Israel and her neighbors, and that would really help the region to stabilize. I think the president's actions in taking airstrikes against ISIS make a lot of sense. We're now facing an unprecedented event in the history of the world where a terrorist organization has control of a specified territory, the apparatus of government, and economic, the financial benefit of selling oil. That certainly warrants grave concern on the part of the President and the Congress, and they ought to get together and make sure they agree going forward.
Thanks, Doug. Thanks for that great question. We'll now go to Ray from Murray. Ray has another question about education and higher education and dealing with immigration policy. Before we get to Ray, another reminder, if you have a question, press 0, and you'll be connected with an operator to ask a question of Doug. Just press 0 on your keypad to ask a question. Now to Ray, go ahead and ask your question when you're ready.
Okay, Doug, it's good to talk with you. I had an opportunity when your dad was in Congress to work directly with him on a number of issues at that time, education and economic development here in Utah, not only here in Utah, but in his office in Washington, D.C. And oftentimes
that's nice
I
to hear,
would
Ray.
walk
Thank
out of
you.
his office.
That's nice to hear, I would say. Thank you.
Yeah, oh, you're welcome. Oftentimes I would walk out of his office and I said, I'm not sure I talked with a Democrat or a Republican. I was of the opinion at that time, and I still hold it, that he was very nonpartisan and an excellent person, and I would look to you carrying on some of the traditional things I observed in your father. Now, the question
Ray,
I have...
let me just comment on that for a sec. I agree with you. I think we need to work across party aisles to get things done. You know, for me, party is a very distant consideration. I don't consider that I work for a party. I consider that I work for Utah voters. I'm going to put those people first, and those will be my priorities.
And that'll be good. And I know if you make it to Congress, you'll be pressured by the Democratic Party to get in line with the other people as to how they want you to vote. But I'm glad to hear that you're going to stand fast for what we need in the state of Utah. Now, the main question that I have is I'm an adjunct professor at the University of Utah, and I'm very concerned with the number of foreign students who are being invited to come into our schools here because they're bringing money with them as they are supported by the governments of the countries that they're from. We spend a lot of money training these students and developing their skills and creative abilities, and then they go back to their own individual countries and there compete directly with the United States. These students occupy spaces that could be filled by other students here in the United States. And my concern would be a lot of the students that come here on student visas never attend college or a university but disappear within the system. And with our government now being bogged down by so many illegal people coming in, there's no way that they can track what's happened to these students that come in on a visa with intent of not going to college but just legally within the United States.
Well, Ray, you've raised a couple issues there. All of them concern, I think, the obvious need we have to have for immigration reform. We need to have a congressional system that works and have an immigration system that works. I certainly want to keep track of people coming into the country and overstaying their visas or whatever the circumstances are. I want to stop any illegal immigration process that's occurring, and we need to do that. You referenced these student visas. You know, in some cases, I certainly wouldn't give preference to foreign students over an American student. But in some cases, these people are getting educated in our country and they want to stay, and their visas don't allow them. Now, in some of those cases, I think it would be sensible to reform the H-1 visas that allow them to come and study, to allow them to stay and build the economy if that's what they choose to do. That would benefit all of us if we had more engineers and scientists and so forth. In particular, that's a weakness we have in our economy that some foreign students could help us with. So I think we ought to turn it around, and rather than send them back if they want to stay, we ought to use those educations to build our own economy.
Thanks so much for your question, Ray, and thanks for the answer, Doug. We'll now go ahead and move on to Jim from Holiday. Jim has a question about national defense. Before Jim gets his question in, though, a reminder that if you have a question for Doug, press 0, and you'll be connected with a volunteer operator so you can get set up to ask Doug a question. Again, just press 0 on your keypad at any time to ask Doug a question. Now on to Jim with your question. Jim, go ahead when you're ready.
Hi, Mr. Owens. Thanks for taking the question. I just wonder what your thoughts are on national defense and our current state of the military with the cuts that are taking place? Thank you.
Well, thank you for the question. You know, I believe in having a strong military. I think history has shown we've got to do that. We all thought when the Cold War ended that things would get simpler, and we could cut the defense budget, and it turns out that's not true. I do think that we need to maintain a very strong military. I think the threats are greater than ever. We need to watch nuclear non-proliferation. Those things are very important to me. And we will. If I have my say, we will have a defense second to none.
Thanks again for your question, Jim. And now we really appreciate the time. Thanks for all of those who have joined us on the call tonight. Unfortunately, we couldn't get to every question. If you have another question that you weren't able to ask tonight, we would encourage you to stay on the line, and you'll be able to leave a voicemail at the conclusion of the call. You're also welcome to get on the website, VoteDougOwens.com, and leave any feedback or questions there. You can also find out more about Doug's positions. Right now, we're going to go ahead and give Doug another minute to wrap things up and talk about any other issues that he'd like to discuss before we end the call tonight.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody, for participating. It's tremendous that you're interested in the process. Voters need to take a careful look at their candidates and insist on somebody who agrees with their views and values and puts Utah first. And I make that pledge to you. I know that many of you have recently, today, as soon as today or this week, will be receiving your mail-in ballots. And I can't tell you how important it is. And I think this country is at a turning point. We've got to end the partisan gridlock. And I want you to know that's my native outlook, to bring people together and work across party lines to get things done. I hope that you will return those ballots. I hope you'll get out to vote. I hope you understand from what I've been saying tonight that I'll go to Congress to represent you in Utah and not any ideology or partisanship that comes from anywhere else. I ask you for your vote. I think that I will make you proud, and all Utahns will will be proud of the kind of representation that I have to offer. Thanks very much. Again, if you're interested in volunteering or otherwise supporting, please jump on our website, VoteDougOwens.com. Thanks again, everybody.
Thanks, Doug. Thanks to everyone who participated. Again, Doug's website is VoteDougOwens.com. We would encourage you to go to the website to learn more about Doug and to potentially get involved and volunteer on the campaign. Thanks again, everyone. We hope you have a great rest of your night. Thank you.